to another episode of Collective Conversations. I am your host, Mike Brewer, and I am excited about our guest today, Hugh Kolias. Hugh is the CEO of Yuhu, and we'll unpack that in just a second. It's an awesome name. Hugh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. I'm excited, and thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And the one thing I forgot to ask you pre-record was how to pronounce your last name, and I'm quite certain I butchered it.
No, you are the first person that's actually nailed it on the first try. So kudos. That was super impressive.
Wow. Well, thank you. I saw it and I thought, oh, hope this goes right. All right. All right. So Hugh, I know you and I have been trying to connect. We've connected once and we've been trying to connect at least, I don't know, 275 times since then. Seems like that. That was many, many, many months ago, but I remember that being a delightful conversation, and I thought you would be an incredible guest for our podcast, and we also record this and put it out on YouTube. But the story of Yuhu, the story of you, I want to start to try to unpack that with something that you keep on your LinkedIn profile. It reads, "Property management shouldn't be hard. That's why we're reshaping the multifamily experience." And I'm wondering if you can unpack that for us.
Yeah, that's a great question. And how much time do you have?
A ton.
Apparently, yeah, exactly. That was the cue, and it's over now. But no, it's as it. Firstly, all of our conversations have been tons of fun and super insightful, and that's kind of the general thesis. And part of our culture at Yuhu is just have fun. And on the property management side, there's not enough emphasis, I think, on the property teams and the property team members and the day-to-day and what they go through. Because there's a ton of ups and downs. And I think at times we overcomplicate things for the property team members. And sometimes we overlook them and we're so focused on, resident centricity or, operational nuances or things like that we actually don't appreciate the human element on the site side. So that's something that we over the last 6-7 years have been really kind of focused and dialed into. My family has, and that's kind of my background, is they own and manage 30,000 units across Canada, and I wanted to start something in the software space because that seemed like the fun thing to do at the time. Looking back on it, you're like, oh, was that the right thing? It was, of course, but so it seemed like such a great way to meld the two philosophies together, and we just kind of co-developed the platform with some of the leading property management companies in Canada, and through that, we kind of just learned that insight on the site teams, and the technology they use is super clunky. They're using 15,000 different browser windows to go through in the different software platforms and providers, and it's also, most of it's kind of built in the 1980s, 1990s. Right. So not only is their day-to-day really tough because they have to have tough conversations sometimes with residents or prospects, and hopefully most of their day is filled with delightful conversations like this. But our focus was, both internally as a company, it's, have fun. Let's enjoy kind of our time together. And, you're at work 80%. Well, in my case, it's like 99.9% of your time. So why not have fun? And why do you have to delineate between, work life and personal and be a different person in both sides? And the same goes to as we work with our client partners and provide not just the software, but the service around it. And that's kind of where we've been really kind of dialed in, is trying to we're making a play on giving your site teams a vacation, not a literal one. So we're actually doing like a raffle and providing for our users as well as prospects, and we'll add you to the list. It'll be a great vacation. It'll be tons of fun. but also the non-literal way, which is easy to use software, a fun support team to kind of help them through the process. And it's been a really fun journey. So it's exciting to kind of see where we came from and where we're going. Our idea is, if you can give this beautiful checklist to the site team of what they have to do, and it actually takes them exactly where they need to go from a software or communications perspective, then you can take anyone, put them in that property team seat. They're not fighting with the software, they're not fighting with the solution, and it just kind of shows them what to do on a day-to-day basis. um, yeah, it'd be a beautiful, beautiful future that we're excited about.
I love it. Quixotic. I like it. I, I wonder if you take us back to the sort of the genesis moment or the catalyst that uh, gave you the idea to create something like this, but not just that moment, but also the moment or the series of decisions that you made to be more team member centric versus resident centric. Not that the resident doesn't get served through this platform, but what moment in time gave you the aha? We should do the team member instead of the resident. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and my dog is actually, just give me 2 seconds. I'm just
We
gonna take
love
her outside.
dogs.
I think she just wanted outside on the balcony, but hopefully she doesn't come back. But it's super interesting because there's always in every business, there's always the is your customer the most important thing, or is your team the most important thing? And there's always kind of two schools of thought. One is the customer is always right, and then the other is if we treat our employees with a ton of respect and excitement, then they're going to show that exact same experience to the residents, and it's going to flow through. And indirectly, you're actually being resident centric by providing your site teams with um, that kind of thought train. And I think that's where we kind of came upon it just talking with operators. And there was one operator, they had 15 16,000 units, and their CEO had came in 6 7 years ago. And the first thing he kind of did when he landed in that role was going from the customer's always right and we must do everything for the customer or the resident, to what's best for like the site teams. So as an example, 24-hour maintenance, it's is for a site team member, you're on call, so your quality of life isn't great. You're also probably not making competitive wages, because within the property manager space, that's a whole different topic. But wages haven't really caught up with the type of work, I'd say, that everyone's kind of doing on a site level basis. And what he noticed was the employees, they'd say, we need to do this because it's for the resident. He's like, well, like, what about you? Like, what are your thoughts? And like, what do you mean, what about me? Like, that doesn't matter. And then he was like, oh my goodness, like this is like super backwards. And as soon as they started kind of shifting that mentality and saying, okay, like, what's best for the site team to then provide that great resident experience and that great employee experience, their EMPS shot up, and then their NPS actually shot up respectively as well. So they started to see like a direct correlation between that employee centricity and the resident centricity, and it kind of bled through. Of course, you have to have resident specific programs and engagement aspects like that, but I look at my personal life, and I look at friends who aren't happy in their personal life, and therefore they kind of, it bleeds through into work, and then it has all these like negative effects. And Jeff Bezos has that great work life integration quote, which is you got to be happy in both to be happy in totality.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's conversations like that with a number of operators who kind of took that lens. It's not that they don't care about the resident, and I think that's like an important kind of point there, but it just seemed to be super intuitive. And we do tons of training with site teams all the time, so it's great to hear their perspective. And you know, I think most people listening to this are from the industry, so they understand and can empathize with what the site teams deal with on a day to day basis. Sometimes you can't even make that stuff up. You're just like, this is absolutely insane. But you know, so we're really trying to empathize with that, and it's tough in software to get the rest of the team to understand what the site teams actually go through on a day-to-day basis, and the product team, and because that's ultimately who's a big user of the platform, and then providing the experience for their customers. So it's yeah, it's been an interesting kind of journey, and I'm sure we'll continue to like think through it over time with the more kind of experience that we go through. But feels intuitive, but would love to kind of hear your thoughts because I feel like everyone has their own kind of spin.
It's I just had excuse me, a similar conversation. Let's say it was a week ago, for lack of remembering. It it was we were having a conversation about software development, and we were actually talking with a, let's call it the leader of the developers or the manager of the developers, and he was talking about how difficult it was to get those two sides right, end user, developer, and somewhere here in the middle you got to bring that together. And I recall a story where I was sitting in a room with somebody who had written a machine learning or AI. It wasn't a bot; it was like a true NLP sort of leasing agent, and and what was really cool, my experience was this particular individual had with him a developer, and we were sitting in the room and we were saying, oh, it'd be really cool if it did this and here's why, and they would literally tap it out right in front of us.
Mm.
and and then they would like turn the keyboard around or turn the laptop around like this and we're like, yeah, like that, that's super cool. But what it brought to mind, and the punchline to the story was, in my head, it becomes super interesting when you put the real end user in the room. But you also have to have this sort of mediator who's versed in the art of articulating what business use
Mm.
end user is. And because this is a whole other language, right? The code, I've never done code, but I imagine it's a whole other language. So this person is key, but having all these people in the room at the same time seems to be the way to accelerate the pace of development. Just this guy's opinion.
Yeah, it's
Only because of seeing it real time.
yeah, it's a very cool. To your point, having that translator, which I guess on our side is like a product owner, to do like that translation is like so invaluable and very very hard to hire for. But in the ideal state, you get an ex property manager who's super interested in building product and technology, and then they can kind of then you have that perfect one to one where it doesn't get kind of watered down in between, call it like tech speak.
Yeah.
So that's the ideal state, but also there's a shortage. I think in all industries from a hiring perspective, so it's hard to find that. But we've been fortunate to find ex property team members to join the team, and also just work extremely closely, exactly like you're saying, with clients or prospects, and you're literally just building it in a room or virtually, I guess, now that everyone's super remote, and really getting to the source and solving the core problem instead of just some of the symptoms. And that's, I think, something that I've uh, underestimated is asking why 5 times, and then
Oh,
probably asking why 5 more times.
yeah.
um, you can solve a lot more problems in advance by going deeper down, and that's where having a great product person um, comes into handy.
I think, there is such a valuable lesson in that asking why 5 times that comes to mind for me. There many times we're all guilty of this, and I'll raise my hand to be super included in this group. You have someone that comes to you and they describe a scenario or a situation to you in an emotionally loaded way. And I don't mean that as a condescending remark,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
they're very amped up about it, and you get caught up in the emotion of that, and especially people who are problem solvers, they immediately go to work on solving a problem only to discover That's that's not even the problem.
Yeah,
It's like
totally.
way over here in left field, right? You're trying to
Yeah.
solve a baseball problem and it's really like a football problem. It's but that to your point there in the lesson and asking why 5 times, you're like just peeling the layers of the onion back and getting to the pure definition of an issue before you go run off and solve it, right?
Oh, it's crazy, and doing being on the implementation side in software for solving a lot of the both actual problems and perceived problems is, I think, part of the art and I guess a bit of science
Yeah,
during implementation, because it's no one really, and it actually be really interesting to hear how you kind of navigate this within Radco, but most companies that we work with don't really have a firm handle of the operational aspects that go on between all the different sites. And of course, it gets worse as your portfolio expands because it's just harder to, um, I guess, control in a certain sense.
sure.
Where it'll go down to we learned early on that you almost have to implement on a site by site level basis, because the head of operations would be like, hey, like this is our lease, this is this is what's done, put in the system, it's great, you deploy it, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, we don't even use this lease, and then the operations manager is like, what are you talking about? And then we're like caught in the middle, like, what do you want us to do? So there's like this yeah, it's part art, part science of trying to work with both the site teams, and then that layer up so that you don't have every site kind of working completely separately. It's definitely been an interesting challenge, but one where we've tried to bring in, again, ex property team members to actually help with the operations and even just like scope that before you even go down the implementation path. But yeah, I would love to hear how you kind of manage that
You
internally.
know,
Well,
it's it's let me preface by saying we have not cornered the market on that particular issue in terms of a solution. I will say that we attempt to. So Abraham Lincoln has this wonderful quote. Um, if given 6 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. Right,
hmm.
and it's really a simply profound way of saying a lot of front side prep time, right, and a lot of if then analysis, or a lot of disaster scenarios, or
Hmm.
all these scenario plannings that you attempt to put down on big whiteboards or on pieces of paper with a lot of smart people in the room at the same time. So we kind of get a lay of the land. We understand the problem that we're trying to solve, or the resident enhancement we're trying to make, or the team member enhancement we're trying to make, or business partner relationship enhancement we're trying to make. We try to get a real clear definition of that with everybody in the room. Then we go through all these scenarios of things that can, and because it is the world and because we are dealing with people, will happen. And so you have all these in a perfect world, it's going to happen this way, and if disaster happens, these things are going to happen, and here's how we'll solve all this. Anyway, you do a lot of frontside prep before the go live date, and then when you go live, you do it under the understanding, or under the premise that things are going to go wrong, and the biggest thing we can do is remember that we are all human, and we need to be graceful with one another, and that will be the expectation. Stuff's going to happen, and we're going to be nice and kind when we have to deal with
Have fun.
that and have fun. That's right.
Yeah, it's such a change management is insane. I don't even know if there's a word to describe it that can really encompass the. It's yeah, it's definitely a challenge, both internally from like a cultural and company perspective, but also on the other side where you're trying to then help the change management process on the client partnership side. It's tough.
That's right. I think if you can create a culture, and we try to do a good job of this, and I know we're not perfect, but you really try to help people feel like they're in a psychologically safe space, and that
Mm.
failure is really just an event. It doesn't define you or who you are as a person. And so if you can work under that premise that it's safe and this is not a reflection of you, we're all learning here, then things seem to roll out much easier in that, under that premise, because it's, even though there is pressure to make sure things are executed well, you're not you're not sort of under the pressure that if this is not perfect, you're going to lose your job. kind
Mm.
of thing. So, yeah, we
Yeah,
try to approach it like that. Um, a lot of times, it
it's
doesn't
such a
work
good
out.
the fear of failure. I think I always underestimate how ingrained that is
Mm-hmm.
into especially every new Yuhulian that comes into the company. Generally, for me, it's like if we goof up, let's own up to it. Let's be transparent. Let's learn from it and kind of move on. And
Mm-hmm.
no need to go through the past multiple times or slap hands and aspects like that. But you always just underappreciate the perspective of a lot of people coming from environments where you fail at something and they the hammer comes down hard and
That's
it
right.
and you just got to continue to repeat that and make sure that culturally everyone's accepting and pushing that forward. And it's also still tough. I mean, being
Oh,
in a leadership position too, the amount of repetition I think that you have to do to make sure that the message kind of proliferates across, and building a culture, which is interesting segue we've kind of found ourselves into, is such an interesting thing to do, especially in a post-COVID world where you're super remote, and it's always top of mind of building connectedness. We have one of our virtues is inspiring belonging, which is making sure that everyone feels included, and it's essentially like the golden rule and a reflection of not just within the company but externally and in kind of your day to day. But doing that in this remote world where you're in Zoom meetings for 8, 9, sometimes 12 hours a day,
right.
it really gets to you mentally. And if you don't have a way of kind of, I guess, venting out some of that, pent up, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's definitely been challenging. And I imagine, I don't know if you guys are doing like a hybrid remote, but of course site teams have to be like fully on site, I imagine now. And so it's that there'd also be a challenge there of you almost have two cultures. And we see that with some of our client partners. You've got, head office has a very different culture than the site teams, and, bridging that gap can be a challenge.
Yeah, I think that is really one of the hardest challenges in leadership, and especially in a hybrid world. We've actually gone fully remote as of a week ago on the residential side of our business. Our
Wow.
company side of the business still has an office. We were at the end of a lease and we moved to a new office. And when we did that, the Radco companies has the office space. Radco Residential is now a completely remote company, um, largely because I wanted it to be that way. But uh, but that doesn't mean that we're not contending with some of those issues. And I think one of the things that we're attempting to do on some sort of choreographed or scheduled manner is, just by way of example, we had a food. I don't want to call it a food drive. We actually packaged food for U.S. Hunger last week. We did it in one of the hotels that we own, and we brought the entire company together on
That's cool.
site, corporate. We blended them together. We put them in a competitive sort of scenario where you're bagging food, like table next to you,
Oh, that's
single
fun.
line. Yeah, it was such a blast. And I'll tell you, Hugh, on the heels of all of that, the energy that people felt and the new connections that they made. I mean, you see people over the screen, but it's quite different to see them in person and feel energy. Um, it was just a huge boost, and it made us want to do it a lot more. I think for the reasons that you cited, it just, you got to do it. I think in a virtual culture, you still have to get together. You have to.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you there. It's like we were talking about going to like conferences. We've got the pre-conference jitters, and then you
Yeah,
go and you kind of get energized by all the people, and then you leave with this like newfound energy, and then of course it just it kind of cycles. It's a cycle. It's a
yeah,
cycle.
it's a cycle.
Yeah, it's such a the whole uh, physical connection component. I think it's overrated but underrated. Like a lot of people talk about it, but I don't think a lot of people actually commit to doing that. And it'll be interesting. Have a random question that's like pseudo related, but taking your resident managers or site teams and almost going like fully remote there in the sense of maybe you have like a virtual appointment through an app or something like that. And everyone's talking about centralizing on leasing, and
Yeah.
but wondering if what your opinion would be on taking it kind of one step further and being able to essentially, whether it's video, well, it'd probably have to be like video or something like that. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So if I understand your question correctly, almost making property management uh, as fully remote as you possibly could, and yeah, I so I often frame that this way. So Bill Gates was on a mission to put a PC or whatever devices operating system could be planted on every desk, both personal and professional, all across the world. Right? He was on a mission to do that many years ago, but he certainly was part and parcel to making that a reality today. And I would like to be on a mission to take those things off of everyone's desk in the leasing office and and completely remove them. It doesn't mean there wouldn't be some sort of device there for demonstration purposes or marketing purposes or things of that nature. So I'm not completely off my rocker in terms of no technology in the office, but 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 I
Typewriters.
right, exactly right, and
Yeah.
flip phone.
Yeah.
So, but my overarching thesis is that we don't really do relationship oriented business at the site level anymore,
Hmm.
and it's partly germane to the lead in from you. It's like you give, or maybe we were talking about this pre-recording. We put so much on our team members
Hmm.
that and it's mostly transaction data entry and all these sorts of things that you can't really look people in the eye when you're having a conversation with them. So I'm very much in favor. It's a long way of saying I'm a complete advocate of what you're suggesting there, and but I don't know that that's going to completely remove a human from the property because I think there is value in having humans. It sounds weird to say humans at the property, uh, but in an ecosystem where they can just connect with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah,
I
it's such
just
an interesting because in Canada they still have the live-in RM model,
mm,
which you probably see in some markets and portfolios in the US, and that's kind of the very, I guess the OG, or like the original property manager, which is very
yeah,
very like human driven, and you have an issue and you go down to Betty Sue and 102, and I like how that rhymed. You're
yeah.
knocking on the door.
Nice work. I like
And it's a completely different, and you actually see that in a lot of the Google reviews where people will call out those like live-in supers, and or those supers have been there for like 20, 30 years, and they're actually the holdouts on the technology side, which is interesting because the
That's right.
vision the vision that you're portraying is it exists, but they're very for probably the wrong reasons. So it's interesting because there's two completely different schools of thought. I'd lean more towards exactly what you're saying, whereas free up as much time as possible to have.
Yeah,
Maybe they're not there 5 days a week because everyone's so focused on NOI and reducing
right,
expenses, and so maybe you have like a rotating community care team that all they do is just like chat with residents or set up in-person appointments, and they can kind
right,
of rotate across the portfolio, because otherwise it becomes like there's a lot of push to self-serve, even like the self tours. And during COVID, I think numbers were inflated because that's
Sure.
really all you could do is so of course they're going to be incredibly successful. And then
Right.
the data started coming out where a big chunk of the reason why people didn't convert was because they didn't have someone to talk to. And I remember being in Canada, self tours don't really exist. They're still kind of being spoken about. And so I was really excited because you go to all the US conferences, it's self tours, this is the future, this is so fascinating. And I've been talking about that for years. And I toured a property in Denver and I left really disappointed because I was expecting this incredible, seamless experience. And it was kind of clunky. And then, they text you and then all of a sudden they're like on your phone and they're like, well, what are you doing now? And are you interested in moving here? And you're like, like this is almost more invasive because now being Canadian, you're like, well, I have to reply to this this individual and go along with this. And you're like, I don't want to ghost the leasing consultant. That would be rude. Uh, so it was a very interesting experience. And then you leave and you're like, well, you don't even need the technology. It's like just give me the keys and a fob. Let me walk around, come back to the site office, and we can chat. And so it was interesting hearing the hype and then going through. And I think exactly to your point, it's that human connection part that I think the industry's almost going too far on the transactional basis.
Yeah.
And then there's the age old debate of, is housing a commodity or is it a luxury? And in some aspects, absolutely, it's a commodity. And maybe that's where that type of interaction set makes sense. Is it's super self serve. We're kind of commoditizing. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with being a
Right.
commodity. But if you're trying to go, the more experience side of things, then you kind of have to take a different approach. And so it's a challenge. I can definitely see that challenge, but you got to kind of swing too far one way to make the adjustment, and you kind of see that already in a lot of conversations. But yeah, just an interesting kind of random thought.
Yeah. It just brought to mind only because my wife and I are selling our home, and I just went through the process of trying to find a rental home, single family, and I'd heard to kind of same theme. I'd heard all these wonderful things about how the single family home market had really figured out how to do self tour and self guided tour, and so I was really excited about actually going through the process. And I learned the big punchline is that I got on Zillow, I do my searches, and I quickly realize, or actually sort of quickly realize that everybody uses Zillow as sort of a point of distribution, and it's like 15 different management companies, and all 15, I'm just making that number up, but all 15 management companies have different processes for their self-guided tour, right? And so I end up with an inbox just full of, here's how our process works, here's how our process works. And then I have like process merge, right? And like I'm thinking I'm doing X process when I'm really doing Y. Anyway, long story short, it was very not user friendly. When you finally figured out one management company's
Yeah,
process, it is really great. It's just that there's not just management, right?
it's
So
everything's so overly complicated, and you see that even when you go in and kind of do a quick assessment of operations. Everyone there's just processes built on processes just because that's how things have been done for 10 years, and no one's like, should we really be doing that still? And
yeah,
then the software providers kind of come in and everyone's like, well, we just have to follow this process, even though technically with their software it would negate having to go through that. And similar with self tours and all those different aspects, I feel like a lot of both software providers and operators kind of overcomplicate a lot of the processes because that's just how things have been done. There's also legislation which I think plays
sure.
a massive role, but lease documents being 120 pages with like the 50 million addendums. And it's like, is this really? It's then you take it. Yeah, I'm gonna go on a complete rant, but I feel
Trust
like
me.
yeah, it's like, can we just like simplify things where it's just like I just want to show up at a building and see if I can envision myself living there, and just like a seamless, like if I can buy a car without going through all these like loops, like why can't I do the same? And then we try to project that messaging, and everyone's just like, hey, that's great, but lawyers, yeah, there's just no way. And you're like,
Those
ah,
darn,
but
those
we
darn
want to be in the
lawyers.
future.
That's
Come
right.
on.
That's I recall hearing Mary Barra, which is who is rather the CEO of GM, I think.
Yeah.
So she was being interviewed on CNBC, and somebody asked her a question about career apparel, or somehow the conversation about career apparel came up. Maybe she brought it up, but under the premise of being simple, she said, "Look, our dress code is dress appropriately."
Yes. Yeah.
That's it. There's no handbook for it. There's no process for it. It's just pick a good outfit and show up, right? Like it doesn't have to be that complicated. I mean, some things I get it. To your point about regulation and
Yeah.
fair housing, things of that nature, I get it. But some of this other stuff, it's what happens, or at least my opinion is, somebody does something bad in your company, and all of a
Yes.
sudden you penalize the masses. You start majoring in the minors to penalize the masses. You think you're doing a good thing,
Totally.
but you're really not.
It's so you're managing by um, I don't call it like the weakest link, but you're managing the detractors when you should be more focused on the great people. And it from a corporate perspective, I think that one's easier to follow. It's like same with like expense policies and to your point, dress code and things like that. It's kind of just like put yourself in the best interest of the company, and then if you don't, instead of creating rules around it, you just, hey, you're not part of this culture.
Right.
Unfortunately, we're just going to have to build a culture that you don't have to build a bunch of rules around. Um, yeah, I could see on the residential side, it becomes a little bit more difficult to do that because
Sure.
the eviction process is you have to go on a treasure hunt in order to figure out all the steps and talk to like 15 different people, and so it becomes obviously a big distraction. And then that kind of dovetails into regulation and just overall, which is there for good reason,
Sure.
because there are bad actors within the space, but you'd have to have a massive cultural shift and change. And now I'm going to go deep into politics, which there's really really no point in going down. But I what I, all I'm saying is I completely agree with exactly what you're saying. It would be so ideal, even like an application form. Like, why do people have to fill out an application form? It's like, you know,
Right.
what are we really getting from these individuals? Like, they say yes or no, and you kind of have to believe it. When you could do financial analysis with some of like the fintech tools out there, and it would
That's
be,
right.
imagine that process. It's like, hey, apply, connect your bank account, and you're done. Like,
Yep.
forget about the 50 million questions. And but there's comfort, I guess, in sticking to process that we'll get through one day, but one thing at a time.
Yeah. I think you hit a really good point there. I remember reading this interesting, probably not interesting to everybody, but interesting analysis of if your process is too simple, then people don't they really don't trust it. Right? If
True.
it's too easy, it's like, oh, that $20 bill laying on the ground. I just wonder if I nah, I'm not gonna. It's like it's like it could be the best thing ever, and you're not going to do it because it's just too easy to do it. Right?
Oh,
It,
it's true. It's funny you mentioned the $20 on the ground thing, because I was golfing the other day, and I don't know if it was a trap. So this is the exact same thinking. Is someone put like golf balls lined up on the tee box. And you're like, is this like a test? And they have like a camera in the bush. So you like, you take the balls and all of a sudden your picture is going to be in like the pro shop, or like, what's going on here? So your mind immediately goes to, but if the ball's in the bush where you're like, like it's pretty clear this one's lost. And you're like, I'll
Right.
pull up
Right.
my bag. So it's so true. Even on like, we've had that challenge on implementation where we'd be like, look, like we're just going to waive the implementation costs because we're keen to do business and this is a partnership. And then people's eyebrows kind of raise. They're like, oh, maybe they don't understand how difficult implementation is because they're not really charging for it. And we're like, oh, like this is ironic. It's like you could we could do this together. It's great, or like make you more comfortable by charging you more money. And it's like this, it's head scratching. And of course, for us, it's like, okay, great. Like we would absolutely love to. But yeah, there's these interesting like isms within society, I guess, that dictate a lot of human behavior. Sort of
We'll
interesting.
we'll, we'll waive the fee, but if you're suspect, we're going to double it.
Yeah, literally. That's like that should be a tagline. It's perfect. You should work in our marketing team.
And you're going to be happy to pay it.
Yeah.
Trust me. I've seen it happen before. You'll be happy. That'll be fantastic.
Yeah.
I I had to ask you a question before it escapes my mind, and
Yeah.
I should have, this is totally off the subject, still on this subject, but Yuhu is a very interesting name.
Ah.
I meant to lead by asking that question. We should have asked that like, Yuhu, what is that? And
Yeah.
Yuhu, I have to know the answer. Like, how did you come up with that name?
I wish there was some amazing backstory where I was trekking through the woods and trying to find myself, and I was like, I was like, oh,
Okay. Oh, can I guess? I have to guess. I have to guess. The HU is part of your first name.
so yes, actually. So when we started the company, my sister, very creative. She named my bird Mr. Flaps, and
That's awesome. That is
so,
awesome.
she's going great into marketing. And then one of another individual who joined me in the early days, his last name was Yu. So she kind of like stuck the names together, and we had this like, it had to be 2 syllables, and it was also really fun because you could, the Staples Easy button, you could have like a Yoo-hoo, or if you have like, marketing, no one does radio ads anymore, but if you were
Right.
to do some sort of, I don't know, advertisement with audio, it's just like, it's fun. You could do like so many different things with it. So it kind of stuck. And we at one point thought about rebranding because like, maybe we have to be more like property kind of
Sure.
centric
Like
in a way.
multifamily or apartment or something.
Yeah, exactly. But it was just so fun, and the logo kind of just stuck, and it also gives us the opportunity to go into other areas, whether it's like single family or senior and things like that. So and conveniently, it's close to Yardi when you're
When you're
exhibiting.
doing a search.
So yeah, it's like, so it was kind of a fun name that I think everyone likes so far. We haven't, in the early days, actually, a lot of people thought we were like a Chinese scam.
Oh,
So we get the emails and they'd be like, "Ooh, like this doesn't sound like a legitimate
oh,
corporation, and it sounds like they're based in Asia or something." And so we got that for the first year or so, and then now that we've been doing this for long enough and have a proper like website and brand and product, you know, it's a good kind of reflection of just our culture and what we're all about, which is having fun, having impact, and you know, doing what we can to push the industry forward.
I love the name. It was so on the heels of talking to you for the first time. I went back to the team and we have a Monday meeting. We call it the strategic thinking team meeting. It's the senior team, and I'm like, yeah, I had a super interesting conversation with Hugh, and his company is Yuhu, and They're like instant smiles, right? They don't even know what it is. Then they're like, "Are you kidding? Like, what? No, 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 no. Let me tell you about. Let me tell you about you." And they're like, "Yes, we have to hear about this." So,
So funny. Yeah, in the US, there's also the chocolate beverage, the Yuhu chocolate
that's
drink, which we had no idea about. So when we were starting to have conversations with people based in the US, they're like, "Oh, like the chocolatey drink," and we're like, what are you talking about?" And they're like,
sure.
"Oh no." But I think with the health trends and stuff, that's probably on the out. So we won't have too much brand competition there.
I have to share this to that point. In the very early innings of my career, I worked for a company that was the letters were EPT, so EPT management company. Well, EPT is also a pregnancy test, in like, and so when I would tell people like he worked for EPT, you really? And I had no idea. I was just clueless when people look at me like cross eyes. Until finally someone said, "Well, it's like like the pregnancy testing." No, not like that at all, actually. So, anyway, I would love to. We're running up around 50 minutes. I am interested. So for our listeners and our viewers, if it's not been obvious, we have been talking about a property management system called Yuhu. Hugh is based in Toronto, Canada, if you haven't picked that up either, and is truly one of the kindest people I've ever interacted with. I really enjoy you and your time.
Vice versa.
Um, yeah, so I just in the interest of our viewers and our listeners, where can people learn more about you, learn more about Yuhu? Certainly, maybe to in cap, learn about things that you guys. I love technology, and I'm always attempting to think 3 to 5 to 10 years down the road and where all this stuff evolves, where it ultimately lands. And so, sort of paint a picture, if you don't mind, of what you think the future of property management will look like. But first, tell us where people can find you, and sort of then in cap with that vision, and we'll sort of call this an
Yeah,
episode.
a lot of pressure.
Yeah, come on.
I'm gonna
This
look
is the
back on this.
punchline. It's the
Yeah,
crescendo moment.
3 to 5 years from now, we'll pull up this video and be like, "Oh,
Wow, we
I
were
like nailed it," or
really.
completely off. It's yeah. Learn more about us on our website's a great start. yuhu.io. But honestly, even just connecting on LinkedIn with myself or anyone on our team, it's all about just making connections, having great conversations like this. And my philosophy is more so just connect. I'm also a terrible salesperson because I'm maybe it's because I'm Canadian. We're not very pushy, so it's like let's just like learn about each other and compare notes, and hopefully at the end of the conversation we both feel smarter. And then if there's like a technology need, we can dig deeper. But if not, continue to keep in touch. And so those are the fun conversations too. I haven't
Yeah,
stressed it enough. It's all about having fun.
that's right.
So that's from that perspective. In the future, everyone says automation. But I think before we can get to that true holy grail, and I think you actually nailed the future already, which is trying to remove as many of the devices
Mm,
and kind of steps required from the site teams as much as possible. And I think a lot of that starts with just integrating into either not necessarily a singular solution, but one solution that brings in all the different interaction points and call it point solutions into one in an actually integrated way, which I think is a big pain point in the industry today, where you've got like 5 or 6 different browser windows open and the data is kind of segregated, and you need to hire a data team and bring it all together, and then your site team are just pulling their hair out because they're like, oh well, I'm going to talk with them here, and then I'm going to send them a lease over here. I know now they're a resident, and now I got to set up their smart home stuff. And we're overcomplicating it for the site teams. The resident has like 5, 6 apps that they go throughout their entire resident journey.
That's right.
So as much as I want to project the future in 3 to 5 years, where it's we got tons of AI going, and virtual reality, and maybe with maintenance we've got augmented reality going on, and all these fun buzzwords. I think as an industry, almost we got to take a step back in order to kind of step forward. And I think that's if we can solve that problem and get all of the workflow data flowing through a singular place. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's one system that does everything, but just some way of bringing it all together. So then you can understand the insights that you can then automate and push that forward. As much as technology evolves as quickly as it does, 3 to 5 years in the property management space with time management, and a lot of like CRM just became a discussion point like a couple of years ago.
That's right.
And in a lot of industries, CRM is you know from maybe a decade or so. So
Right.
it's as much as I'd love to project this incredibly automated robotic future. I think as an industry we almost have to take that one step backwards and say, okay, like how do we actually have that singularly integrated seamless flow for the property teams, and therefore for the resident as well, and making it
Yeah.
just like super simple, like a checklist where it's like, hey, Mr. or Mrs. property team, like you got to reply to this resident, and you got to follow up on an AR balance, and you probably have to do a site walkthrough over here, and it intelligently just takes you to all of those different areas. So I think that it's almost like an assistant for the property team members.
Yeah.
And then once you've got the interaction points and the data, you then automate that. And then that assistant almost becomes the property team member for those monotonous, those basic tasks.
The rote and routine stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can use humans for what humans are great at, which is actual interactions,
Right.
instead of, you know, chatbots, because those are great for, again, the basic tasks. But if your resident's having a bad day, or it's hard for the system to fully personalize that experience. It can, absolutely, and we've got to
Sure.
continue to push down that direction. But leveraging your people for what they do best, which is more complex tasks. I think that's the future. But in order to get there, we got to kind of clean up the mess that is the 50,000 different solutions that everyone's using on a day-to-day basis to run their properties.
Yeah. Who know? It's a lot of crystal ball thinking, and I mean, what you're suggesting about the near term, I think is spot on. The rest of it is crystal ball. It brought to mind the. I won't be able to cite the source of this, but somebody was talking about at some point there'll be sort of this super app, right? And I think they were talking about Facebook, Google, Apple, Instagram, WhatsApp. They were talking about all these different apps that we all govern our lives by, or we're all led by, turning into one super app at some point. And then that super app is that place where you sort of curate all these experiences, but you're one source of data input output, right? But all these other things still exist. They just exist behind the scenes, and it seems like at some point property management will be that in the way of a super app, and some of that is DIY. Some of that is certainly the rote and routine work done by the robot or the bot. But to me, the real differentiating factor in the future, and it's what we should all be after, is getting back to what we were designed to do. To your point, is just be in community and be with one another in real presence, not distracted by all that other stuff that we are distracted by today.
Totally. It's I had a great conversation with a CEO at another, they had 25, 30,000 units. And he was talking about his best vacations are with friends. They share like an apartment together. And it's just this great kind of communal style living, which
Yeah,
people are kind of going down that co-living path, and it works and it doesn't. but it's, or like the We Live kibbutz style,
Yeah,
which there's a lot of controversy behind, the WeWork and We Live and Adam Newman, but I think there's some truth to that, like, community style, and maybe that's more so on the hotel side and the hotel experiences. Because even if
sure.
I look at like Airbnb experiences with friends, going to a
Yeah,
cottage or cabin, and it's way more fun than everyone getting their own hotel room, and it creates that experience that is really hard to, almost impossible to replicate digitally. Um, and I feel like there might be something there in terms of just flipping the script on what we're building, like in amenities. A lot of people that I speak with, they're like, hey, the dirty secret is like we build these amenities to attract prospects to become residents. And hopefully they don't really use them too much. So that from
right.
an operational expense perspective, which is true. I moved into the building I'm in currently because there's a pool, and you're like, I need to be there every day. How incredible is that? And it's like maybe once a month I'm in the pool. And at that moment, you're like, this is so worth it. I need to be here tomorrow. Nope. 1 month later. So I wonder if there's also something there that's less on the technology side and more so whether it's like the physical space or it's like programming the external community into the community, because there's a lot of I guess apps and services out there where they do programming for the
That's
residents.
right. That's right.
And I was going through this discussion with friends too, because I was like, like how incredible would it be? We all live in this this communal floor. We can play games all night. It's gonna be a fun time. We can work. You never have to leave the building. And they're like, well, what if I don't want to live in that area? Or so then you're like, like that's a really good point. Like property management companies are so focused on their singular community of just people that live there. And I
Right.
feel like we're actually all missing the point that community doesn't necessarily have to be where you live.
That's right.
And you could, somehow incorporate, whether the events incorporate the community around it, or it's more just like open. And theoretically that could probably help with like marketing, with branding. Um, so I feel like there's also something there that you could really do something special that a lot of people aren't really talking about because everyone's so centric around like their residents, and therefore that is community. But it's like, well, what if I don't want to be part of this specific community, or what if others want to join in? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Oh, I feel a round two coming on where we unpack the
Yeah,
entire.
it's like, whoops.
We're going to unpack the entire sort of resident experience ecosystem and how we sort of stitch together the fabric of a neighborhood. We're going to figure this out. This is
That'd
going to
be
be.
super. Whoever figures that out, I feel like that's you're gonna change the world. We're
Yeah.
gonna do
All
it.
right.
We're gonna do it,
Sign
Mike.
me up. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, Hugh, this has been a blast, and I want to stress that I appreciate the fact that you invested your time to do this for our audience, selfishly for me, because I think each time I talk to you, I learn so much, and I definitely appreciate and enjoy your personality and who you are as a person. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Vice versa. I really appreciate it too, and always love these chats. I mean, it goes both ways. So I'm looking forward to the next one.
Likewise. All right, and for everyone else, we'll see you next time on Collective Conversations.